3 years ago, my partner and I bought our very first home. It wasn't extravagant, but it was ours, and the neighborhood felt like a gift. The neighbors were kind, the street was quiet, and life finally felt settled. About 18 months later, when those same neighbors decided to sell their larger house next door, complete with a driveway, garage, and even a bathtub we'd always dreamed of, we didn't hesitate. It felt like a once-in-a-lifetime upgrade. We bought it and listed our original home right next door. After reading heartfelt motivation letters from potential buyers, we chose a Polish couple who seemed sincere and polite. They spoke English with us, not Dutch like we did, but that didn't raise any alarms. They asked thoughtful questions about the house, thanked us for small tips, and everything felt perfectly ordinary. In hindsight, that normalcy was unsettling. It was the quiet before everything unraveled. Even before anything major happened, the atmosphere shifted. Strange disturbances began creeping into our nights. Heavy banging at midnight, music blasting through the walls without warning. It wasn't every day, but it was unpredictable enough to keep us on edge. We started feeling like strangers were living inches away. The first real red flag came when the husband returned home with deep damage scraped along both sides of his car, as if he'd ricocheted between guardrails at high speed. His explanation didn't make sense. He blamed a concrete pole on one side and a trailer turning too wide on the other. We nodded, choosing peace over confrontation, even though the story didn't add up. Then one evening around 6 p.m., he called us in sheer panic. He claimed men were outside his house tampering with his security cameras and begged us to check and call the police. We looked, and 2 men were indeed breaking in. We called immediately, but the police took nearly 20 minutes to arrive. By then, the intruders were gone. His wife screeched into the street, abandoned her car, and sprinted inside to check on their small French bulldog right past the officers who had just arrived. As I walked my own dog nearby, I noticed something odd. The husband had parked his car 3 streets away and walked back to the house as if deliberately avoiding being seen. At the time, I brushed it off. Later, reviewing our doorbell footage, we saw the 2 burglars calmly standing outside before the break-in, speaking Polish and discussing which house to target. Nothing was stolen. No one was caught. The whole thing felt staged, like we were witnessing a performance rather than a crime. I told the police it didn't sit right with me, that it felt orchestrated. I never heard back. And from that point on, we realized we hadn't just upgraded our home, we had unknowingly stepped into something far more complicated. A week later, I was at a housewarming party when my phone buzzed. It was my partner. The music next door is insanely loud again. I sighed, thinking it was just another sleepless night. But minutes later, he called, and the irritation in his voice had turned into raw panic. The neighbor's car had just plowed straight through our front garden and crashed into his own front door. Soil, plants, and pieces of our fence were scattered everywhere. 2 men were outside, moving with frantic precision, stuffing the trunk with high-end electronics, flat-screen TVs, professional audio equipment, expensive gear that looked brand new. My partner swore they were the same 2 men from the so-called break-in the week before. This time, the police response was immediate, 7 minutes. Officers arrived while the men were still loading the car. When asked for identification, they casually claimed they had none. Then the situation twisted into something almost absurd. The driver looked an officer straight in the eye and gave my neighbor's full name, insisting he was the homeowner. But here's what made it chilling. In the 9 months they had lived next to us, our neighbor had never spoken Dutch, not once. This man spoke fluent Dutch, albeit with a thick Polish accent. The moment the officers began questioning him further, he floored the gas. What followed was a high-speed chase through our normally peaceful streets, sirens echoing off brick facades until police boxed the car in and made the arrests. Just when it felt like it was over, my partner heard movement inside the neighbor's house. Officers re-entered and dragged out a 3rd suspect who had been hiding inside. While we were inside our own home giving a statement and documenting the damage to our garden, the doorbell rang. We opened it and froze. The real neighbor stood there, barely recognizable. His face was grotesquely swollen and covered in blood. One eye sealed shut, his lips split open, his arm hanging limp at an unnatural angle. His forearm was marked with what looked like defensive stab wounds. He didn't look like a victim seeking help. He looked feral, shaken, and unhinged. The officer attempted to question him, but he flatly refused to file a report or cooperate. Without a statement, there was little the police could do. They let him walk back into his house. Hours later, long after the sirens had faded, our doorbell rang again. It was him, this time trembling. He confessed in broken sentences that he had cheated on his wife and claimed she had sent men to kill him. He begged us to let him sleep in our house for the night. Standing there, staring at this bloodied man entangled in something far darker than a marital dispute, we felt the full weight of how far things had spiraled. Terrified and determined not to be pulled deeper into whatever world this was, we refused and locked the door. My partner, trying to do the decent thing, offered to drive him to the hospital instead of letting him stay. We dropped him off around 30 p.m., telling him we were going to sleep somewhere else because we didn't feel safe in our own home anymore. That part was a lie. We didn't know where else to go. We went back home, locked every door and window, turned off the lights, and sat there trying to steady our breathing. The house didn't feel like ours anymore. It felt exposed. Around 1 a.m., our dog started growling, not barking, growling, a low, deliberate rumble he only makes when someone is standing right at the door. My stomach dropped. We opened the doorbell app, and there he was, back from the hospital, standing on our porch, ringing the bell again and again. We didn't move. We didn't speak. We just watched the screen in the dark, hoping he would leave. Then headlights swept across the street. A car turned the corner. The neighbor instantly panicked. He jumped off our porch and hid behind our cars in the driveway, crouching low in the shadows like he was being hunted. Watching that bloodied, broken man conceal himself behind our cars was one of the most disturbing things I've ever witnessed. This wasn't just drama anymore. This was survival behavior. The car stopped. A woman stepped out. His wife. She walked toward her front door, then hesitated and glanced toward our driveway. She saw him. Time seemed to freeze. We braced ourselves for screaming violence, something explosive. Instead, she slowly approached him. As she stepped under the pale yellow streetlight, she let out a wail unlike anything I've ever heard, deep, guttural, primal. It echoed down the empty street. He stood there silently while she fired questions at him through tears, her voice cracking, growing louder with each sob. It felt less like an argument and more like the collapse of something final. Eventually, they both got into the car and drove away. Just like that. Gone. For 3 days, the house next door sat eerily quiet. No lights. No movement. We didn't even know what had happened to their little French bulldog. When the wife finally returned alone, she found the dog still inside. She told us in a flat, hollow voice that she didn't think she would ever see her husband again. To this day, we don't know the full truth. Maybe it was drugs, maybe debt, maybe a marriage that rotted from the inside out. But after everything we witnessed, the stage break-ins, the lies, the violence, the fear, I've come to one clear conclusion: some doors, once closed, are better left unopened. And I don't think I ever want to know what was really happening next door. This all began back in 2017 when I moved with my parents and little sister into a new house in the suburbs of Montreal, Canada. Before I dive into the unsettling part of this story, it's important to paint a clear picture of my room and its layout, otherwise nothing will make sense from my perspective. The house was a split level with staggered floors connected by short flights of stairs. My room wasn't on the main floor nor in the basement. It sat right in between at ground level. One wall backed onto the garage, while the opposite side featured a large window overlooking the backyard. At the time, the window had vertical plastic blinds, several panels missing, so even when fully closed, I could see the yard outside through the gaps. On the garage side was my closet with sliding mirrored doors. From my bed, no matter which way I faced, the window's reflection stared back at me, creating an odd, endless loop of the backyard inside the room. The strange occurrences began about a year after we moved in, when I was 15. I often stayed up late watching YouTube on my tablet because I struggled to fall asleep. One hot summer night, I left the window open for a breeze. That's when I first heard it, soft footsteps shuffling, maybe someone pacing outside. I froze, paused my video, and set the tablet aside. The noise stopped, and I chalked it up to imagination or background sound in the video. I resumed watching, but then the shuffling returned. I glanced toward the window, nothing. Shrugging it off, I eventually fell asleep. For several nights, there was nothing. Then, one evening, during my usual late night routine, the sound returned. This time, it was different, more deliberate, accompanied by a faint, uneven breathing. My heart rate spiked. I looked toward the window again, still empty. I tried to convince myself it was just nerves turning toward my closet to pick up the tablet. That's when I saw it through a gap in the blinds, reflected in the mirrored doors. Something moved outside. A wave of icy fear shot down my spine. I bolted from bed and woke my parents, insisting something was out there. My dad, skeptical but concerned, went outside to check. Minutes later, he returned, shaking his head. He'd inspected every corner of the backyard, and there was nothing, no footprints, no sounds. He even checked the Ring camera. Nothing. No one had approached the house. Even as he reassured me, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't imagining it. Something or someone had been there, close enough to be seen through the blinds, yet vanished before any proof could be found. That night, the house felt smaller, darker, and far less safe than it had ever felt before. I suggested that maybe someone had jumped the fence into the neighbor's yard, but my dad quickly shut that down. He told me we lived in a safe neighborhood and that I needed to stop watching so many scary movies. Foolishly, I believed him and crawled back into bed, trying to push the fear from my mind. Over the next weeks and months, though, the noises returned sporadically, unpredictable, always late at night. Each time, I rationalized it away, telling myself it was my imagination or the result of too many horror videos. I focused on my tablet, buried myself in videos, and tried to sleep. Winter came, snow blanketed the yard, and the sounds vanished entirely. I convinced myself it had been nothing and forgot about it for a while. The following year, it started up again, still infrequent, once or twice a month, but always after 11 p.m., always when the house should have been quiet. I tried to ignore it, chalking it up to my overactive imagination, even when the noises sounded unmistakably like footsteps or heavy breathing. My late-night horror binge sessions didn't help, and I clung to the belief that my brain was just playing tricks. I avoided the window entirely, and sometimes even the mirror, terrified of seeing something I couldn't explain. Yet part of me wanted proof, even though I knew I wasn't ready to face it. One night, against all reason, I glanced at the mirror instead of the window. I froze. I swear I saw the silhouette of a person reflected back at me. Heart racing, I ran upstairs to wake my dad. Once again, after a thorough check of the backyard, he assured me nothing was there. And once again, I forced myself to believe him. This cycle repeated for months. I adjusted my habits to cope, going to bed earlier, keeping videos louder or using headphones, and strictly avoiding the mirror or direct glimpses of the window. Predictably, the sounds stopped when winter arrived, then returned in mid-spring, haunting the same late-night hours. On an early December night in 2021, a massive windstorm rattled the house. I was on Discord watching a stream with my boyfriend when I decided to grab a glass of water around 11:30 p.m. In the living room, I found my parents still awake, which was unusual. They looked tense, preoccupied, their faces pale in the dim light. I asked if everything was okay, but they brushed me off, insisting it was nothing. Shaking off the unease, I turned toward the stairs, but then flashes of red and blue light streaked across the front window. My stomach dropped. A police car was pulling into our driveway. My parents sprang to their feet the moment they saw the police lights, moving with an urgency that made my heart pound. They ushered me back to my room, telling me firmly they'd call if anything happened, leaving me frustrated and desperate for answers, but I knew it wasn't the right moment to press. I sat on my bed, curiosity gnawing at me, replaying every late night sound, every shadow in the mirror. Not even 2 minutes later, I was called back upstairs. This time, there was no hesitation. My dad's face was grim as he told me what had actually happened. He explained that about 15-20 minutes earlier, in the middle of the windstorm, he had gone into the backyard to check that nothing had been blown over before going to bed. As he scanned the yard, he noticed a strange shape near my bedroom window, illuminated by the faint glow of my room. Adjusting his eyes, he realized it was a man, completely motionless, staring in at me. My dad shouted at him and moved toward him, and the man bolted. He vaulted the back fence effortlessly, like he'd done it countless times before, disappearing into the neighboring yards. In that instant, everything I had feared for years became undeniably real. I hadn't imagined it. Someone had been there, outside my window, watching me. Terrified, my parents called the police immediately, then went to warn the neighbor next door. That's when things took an even stranger turn. The older woman living there refused to open the door. Instead, she yelled at them to leave or she'd call the police herself. The police arrived soon after, but without a clear description, there wasn't much they could do beyond recommending more cameras and increasing patrols, which we promptly did. Thinking back now, that neighbor's reaction still chills me. Why threaten my parents when they were only trying to warn her? Was she living with the man my dad saw, or had she actually glimpsed him too and assumed the wrong thing? Did I know this person, or was it a stranger who noticed a teenage girl's poorly covered window and took advantage? Had he merely been watching, or was he planning something worse? Even now, those questions linger. Every creak I once dismissed, every shadow I pretended to ignore, feels heavier, sharper, more dangerous. I've since switched rooms, choosing one that faces the street instead of the backyard. The window that once reflected every fear now feels like a distant memory, but the terror remains. What frightens me most isn't just that it happened, it's how long it went on, unseen and unchecked, and how easily it could have continued for years without anyone knowing.